In a twist of fate, the survival of two jocks and a cheerleader is in the hands of high school nerds. If they don't work together soon, the teenagers might just become a zombie meal. One afternoon in Lincoln High, Eddie, the resident nerd, walks through the school's halls and heads for detention. While on the way, he spots a zombified jock, though it disappears the moment he looks back, so he shrugs it off. Before he enters the room, he inhales a menthol stick through his nostrils and takes a deep breath. Then, he walks into his crush, Janet, sharing a passionate exchange with a football player and aspiring ROTC applicant, Brad. Eddie takes his chances and offers to tutor the cheerleader in calculus, but her boyfriend interferes and breaks his eyeglasses. Unwilling to fight, he lets the bullying slide and takes his seat to fix his broken frames. In the corridor, Ash, who's known for peddling illicit goods, is skating when he hears a howl from downstairs. He stops to listen but doesn't catch the sound again, so he keeps going. As soon as the teenage boy reaches the classroom, he sits next to Brad's buddy and fellow footballer Jimmy. He hands him a regular painkiller and fools him into thinking it's something else. The goth Willow walks in seconds later, and can't believe that her best friend Eddie is in detention too. She pulls out her portable PlayStation and shows him a zombie film by George Romero, but he's too preoccupied to talk and unintentionally walks out on her. The nerd approaches the newly arrived teacher, Mrs. Rumblethorpe, and begs her not to tell the principal about an earlier incident. He explains it'll ruin his opportunity to get into Harvard, but she insists on reporting the serious matter. Meanwhile, Ash tries to be chummy with Mark when he notices the student's sick appearance and asks how he's feeling. The quiet boy says he's been unwell since a homeless man bit him in the parking lot hours ago, then shows his injured hand. Worried, the skater calls the teacher, but his schoolmate starts to vomit violently, so he urges him to visit the nurse instead. Within seconds, the ailing teen turns around and growls loudly, alarming the people in the room. As they gather around Mark to investigate, Ed glimpses the zombie movie his friend is watching on her PSP and realizes they might be dealing with a similar case. He strives to warn Mrs. Rumblethorpe, but sadly, she gets bitten on the neck. The nerd bravely rallies his fellow young adults to yank the undead from the woman and send him crashing headfirst to the stone counter. He falls to the ground after hitting his head and remains motionless long enough that they think he's dead. While Willow removes Janet's skirt to stop the teacher's bleeding, Brad rushes to find help, only to discover the hallway consumed by chaos. The jock calls them outside, and they soon witness two infected students ravage someone. As they watch the attack, Jimmy wonders if it's rabies, though Eddie asserts they're zombies. When the students capture the attention of one, they scream in terror and hurriedly retreat to the detention room. They briefly debate whether to stay or escape, but a reanimated Mark lunges at them and causes them to flee back to the halls without further thought. Brad takes the lead and guides the rest of the group through the corridors, dragging their injured teacher along. They eventually wind up in a gated hallway and circle back to find an exit. However, they approach an undead girl too closely, forcing them to hide in the school's main office nearby. Inside, the teens realize their phone signals are dead, and Eddie fails to find the principal alive. Determined to survive, they huddle and agree to hold out at the library because it's easily defensible. It's just down the hall, and no student would go there. Soon, they carry out their plan and carefully leave the office to test Ed's theory that zombies only pay attention to what's in front of them. In the hallway, the nerd sneaks past zombies who are busy eating, and the team silently cheers him on from afar. Unfortunately, Ash stupidly yells out his congratulations, attracting the living dead from both directions. As the infected shuffle towards the panicked teenagers, they race downstairs for safety. The nerd shouts frantically and bangs on lockers until the swarm gets distracted and comes after him, leaving enough space for the others to dash to the school library. Eddie follows them shortly, and they block the room's entrance with everything they can find. While the cheerleader watches over the unconscious Mrs. Rumblethorpe, Willow joins her close friend by the window and sees that Lincoln High is overrun by the undead. The educator passes away minutes later and doesn't respond to Janet's attempts to resuscitate her. The girl then closes her eyes as she prepares for the next step in CPR, not knowing she's about to deliver rescue breaths to a reanimated corpse that's bracing for its first meal. Sensing the danger, the nerd pushes his crush out of harm's way, and she falls into her boyfriend's arms. She thanks the jock for saving her, and they have a fervent moment, although the goth interrupts them as she struggles to restrain the infected woman on her own. The teens work together to hold down Mrs. Rumblethorpe, but unfortunately, Brad gets bitten on the finger during the commotion and selfishly hides his injury from the others. Meanwhile, Eddie and Willow tell everyone that the only way to stop a zombie is to destroy its head. Ash, who says that the teacher has made his school life difficult since he was a freshman, volunteers to help deal with her. They quickly take up his offer since they can no longer subdue the woman, leaving him to decapitate the undead with a paper cutter. That evening, the two best friends grasp the reality that without phone signals, landlines, or reliable internet, they're completely cut off from the world. Later, the group spreads throughout the library, each claiming their private space. Despite their unease, most of the teenagers manage to preoccupy themselves. Brad, however, worries about the thick yellow substance oozing from his wound, and Ed is alarmed by the growing number of infected people in the school's corridors. Anxious that the living dead will eventually break into their barricaded fortress, the nerd immediately gathers his schoolmates in another meeting to discuss their next steps. Jimmy recommends making a run for it, and his best pal nods in agreement, but the cheerleader says she can't bring herself to leave. The nerd glares at the goth to say something, who tells the group that every zombie movie she's watched suggests that going outside is a bad idea. They debate further, and though Brad initially encourages Janet to leave, he changes his mind after she votes on staying. Without delay, he takes over the assembly and explains that the biggest threats to their safety are a breach through the front door and an unidentified weak spot. The jock then proposes a recon and assigns fellow students to explore different parts of the library, hoping to find a book that might help them survive the attack. He learns that Eddie and Willow are experts in the living dead and makes them responsible for intelligence. Just then, the lights flicker from a sudden thunderstorm, and an infected librarian appears behind Jimmy while he reads the magazine. Everybody hears him scream and rushes to his aid, but when they get there, the undead already has him pinned to the floor. Brad and Ed instantly hurl the reanimated woman to the room's corner, and the teens continuously throw books at her to stave her off. In the meantime, the football player and his girlfriend attend to his best pal, who feels faint from losing blood. Upset with his friend's demise, the jock grabs the flagpole, breaks it in half, and stabs the zombie with it. The team begins talking about the fate of the injured boy and what they'll do with him, afraid that he'll turn like Mrs. Rumblethorpe and feed on them. Jimmy agrees with their assessment and bids his buddy a last farewell, then jumps out the open window. Within seconds of falling, a horde surrounds the jock to devour him, as some survivors watch in horror. Janet breaks down in tears following the incident and despairs that they won't make it out alive. The teenagers gather around to comfort the sobbing girl with a warm embrace. Minutes later, they're all back in their own spots, trying to keep themselves busy. While Eddie and Willow enjoy exchanging ideas on what caused the outbreak, Brad is increasingly bothered by his worsening infection, and his girlfriend starts throwing the contents of her bag. The skater, seeing that the cheerleader is distressed, rallies everyone and suggests an activity to help them calm down. He shows his secret stash and then walks behind the librarian's desk, where the students follow him and share something to ease their nerves. Ed initially hesitates to participate, but eventually joins in on the fun, whereas Ash gets curious and asks the new faces what they're doing in detention. The lovebirds confess to getting caught in the bathroom during an intimate moment, and the group teases Janet, causing her to cry. The girl soon opens up about the pressures of being popular and how she always has to look or act a certain way. She weeps over the fact that she's worked hard to maintain her image, only to be judged and hated by others. After empathizing with his crush, the nerd shares his personal challenges and shows them the gun he's been hiding. He admits to planning on taking his life after Mrs. Rumblethorpe caught him taking Adderall without a prescription, jeopardizing his chances of studying at Harvard. Eddie says he now wants to live with his newfound friends and recommends working together to survive, although the skater doesn't share his enthusiasm. As they squabble over differing opinions, Willow hears strange sounds in the hallway and urges the teens to listen in. They try to make out the noise from behind the bookshelves when an infected man's hand breaks through the wall and grabs Janet. Ed rapidly pushes her to safety and drives the zombie away, prompting the cheerleader to hug her hero. But then it returns and grabs his crotch. The nerd struggles to free himself despite some pulling, so the girls push a wheeled shelf in his direction and manage to break off the undead's arm. However, the severed hand continues to cling to him, so Ash comes to his rescue and with enough tugging, successfully pulls it off. Later that evening, Willow calls out her best friend for being a mindless zombie like everyone else and for wanting to end his life. She believes they shouldn't live according to people's expectations, and that failures, such as not getting to Harvard, don't mean life isn't worth it. Eddie concedes to her observations and asks her a vague question. The teenage girl, who assumes he's asking her out on a date, awkwardly answers that she wants to see him romantically if they survive without clarifying the conversation. As the night progresses, Ash needs to use the bathroom, and Brad, whose infection has spread throughout his arm, thinks it's time for them to leave. Ed objects and insists on staying, but the goth points out his earlier assessment that the barricade won't hold any longer. Willow tells the team she knows a safe way out and unscrews the vent cover, revealing a shaft that's big enough for them to fit through. The nerd hesitates to go, and when Janet stays behind, he decides to remain with her and apologizes to his closest friend. The goth is hurt by her friend's choice and continues to set off with the jock and the skater. As they crawl through the vents, she leads their way with only a lighter to illuminate their path, although she isn't sure which way they should be going. Eventually, the trio encounters a zombie rat, just as Ed feared. They scream in panic and swiftly retreat backward until they reach a junction. Just when they're able to pause and catch their breaths, the vents start shaking violently, causing them to fall down an empty corridor. Ash discovers his stash is missing and calls for Brad's assistance so he can get back up and retrieve it. However, the infected rat catches up to the skater and eats him, leaving only his legs. The noise attracts the living dead from adjacent hallways, so the remaining teenagers each grab one leg and use it to fend them off as they desperately fight their way back to the library's safety. Meanwhile, Eddie and Janet have an honest conversation as they gaze into each other's eyes. She thinks he's great and says she won't date him because of their social circles, but she adds that she also doesn't want to pass away without having a special experience with a guy. The nerd is shocked by her unusual offer and worries about his friend's feelings, but he can't resist his crush and gives in to her desire. However, their romantic encounter is cut short when they hear the goth and the jock shouting and banging on the door. The cheerleader and the boy move quickly to let them in, then work together to fortify the library's entrance. Once it is safe, she pulls him into a room to continue where they left off, while a heartbroken Willow stares from outside in disbelief. When the goth notices that the football player is slowly turning, she rushes to the other two and walks in on them as they share a passionate moment. The girl is hurt, but proceeds to inform them of the jock's condition, and they confront him. Unfortunately, Brad has turned and immediately goes after Janet, who believes she deserves to be attacked because she cheated on him. As Eddie and his friend struggle to keep the barricade up, they motivate her to defend herself against her boyfriend. They reveal he had 6 more girlfriends when he was still alive, and told everyone in school they were intimate, even though they were waiting for prom. Enraged by his betrayal, the scorned cheerleader hurls a chair at the zombie, stabs him with a wooden stake, and sends him flying out the window with a forceful kick. She eventually joins the two friends and realizes the fortress is about to collapse. The nerd surveys the room and sees an assortment of items that they use to create an escape plan. Minutes later, they trigger a smoke bomb and emerge from the library with weapons, a makeshift wagon, and a shield to protect them. The teens glide through the hall and do their part to make it out safely as a team. Ed shoots with his gun, Janet throws her makeup, and Willow hits the infected with a flagpole. Soon, they tumble down the stairs, and their now undead schoolmates pounce on them out of nowhere. The goth manages to shake Ash off and single-handedly rescues the nerd from Jimmy. Then the two friends save the cheerleader from Brad before heading downstairs. They retrieve the gun from the reanimated guidance counselor and notice it's nearly empty, so they hastily dash through the corridors past dozens of living dead without firing a bullet. When they reach the last hallway in their path, Willow breaks through a locked door. Eddie then hands her the loaded gun and explains that he'll stay to hold off the zombies. Before going their separate ways, he says he wants her, not Janet, and the overjoyed goth reminds him that he still owes her a date. The nerd uses a bat and other random weapons he finds to plow through the horde in the main corridor, while the girls sprint through the bleachers to avoid an attack from the Walking Dead. Sadly, the cheerleader gets bitten in the leg as soon as they climb up the ladder. Unable to shake off her undead squad member, the goth saves her by shooting it, and they eventually make it to the roof. Ed hears Janet scream and speedily runs to the school's basketball court. A zombie army surrounds him, but he manages to survive the ordeal and make it to the top of the school. The goth is relieved to see he's still alive and hugs him tight, then uses her last bullet to stop the infected man who followed him up the ladder. However, they freeze in shock when a reanimated Brad appears and heads straight for them. The other girl sees that her new friends are in danger and charges at him with full force, pushing him off the building and causing them both to fall. Once they're alone, Eddie and Willow sit on the rooftop of Lincoln High and have a sweet conversation. Just when they're about to share a tender moment, the military shows up to clear the infected and rescue survivors. The two are thrilled at the sight and excitedly embrace, then go to the front lawn to pick up where they left off. Safe at last, the new lovers hold each other close and share one final impassioned moment. However, as soon as their lips part, an undead Janet tackles Ed to the ground, and the goth is left with no other choice but to witness the horror unfold.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.